mean, I'd worked on a lot of campaigns,
Yeah.
right? I had worked for Walter Mondale.
Right.
He lost 49 states. And then I worked for Tom Bradley, who was the mayor of Los Angeles. He ran for governor of California and lost. Then I went to work for Michael Dukakis. Okay, that didn't go too good. Then I worked for Dianne Feinstein in the campaign for governor, which is the only race she'd ever lost.
Right.
So, it's pretty easy to understand why Bill Clinton hired me. But when we got to election night, I had never really worked on a winning campaign.
Yeah.
We're kind of rolling around the bars of Little Rock, and I realized we have to work tomorrow. That really had not happened to me before.
Today on 13th and Park, we welcome Dee Dee Myers, the first woman ever to serve as White House press secretary under President Bill Clinton. She's navigated historic moments and relentless scrutiny with clarity and composure. From Ballard Studios in West Hollywood, California, this is 13th and Park.
I never dreamed going into the White House you'd risk your freedom.
We in Congress will act together when we have to act.
They deserve better, and we owe them some results.
I believe this country's best days continue to remain ahead. I had no idea the monster we unleashed.
I play every night, and people love it. They're going berserk.
Well, I don't have any Emmy Awards behind me yet, but,
I'm sure they're coming.
I'm so glad to be here on 13th and Park.
Dee Dee Myers, welcome to 13th and Park.
Thank you, Anthony. It's great to be here.
it's
Always
good
good to be with you.
It's good to see you again, too. It's so interesting because I was leaving the governor's office as you were coming in.
Yeah.
And we probably overlapped by, I don't know if it was a couple weeks or
Yeah, not very
whatever
long.
it was. It wasn't very long, and you had a different role then. You were coming in part because you had so much experience just in life and dealing with things at the highest level that we'll talk about with President Clinton. But it was a time of crisis, and boy, did we need your skill set.
Yeah, I came in as a volunteer.
Yeah.
And I came in because, people were dying and the economy was collapsing. People were losing jobs at a, astronomical pace. And it was a really difficult time in California and all over the country and around the world, by the way.
Right.
So I came in for, to deal with the pandemic for a couple months.
Yeah.
And it's been 5.5 years, or almost 6 years. So can't believe that it's turned into this, but it's been great.
It's funny because I've done the thing where you go back and forth between government and private sector. You obviously had a great career in government service and politics, and then you left and went into business and eventually became head of public affairs for Warner Brothers, right?
Right.
Did you go straight from the White House to Warner or no?
No. Many
lots of
years in
gaps
between. Yeah. So after I left the White House, I had a TV show with my partner, Mary Madeline, who was James Carville's wife and a Republican, and they had their famously bipartisan relationship and marriage. And Mary and I had a great time. So we did a show, and then I was basically a pundit for many years. I worked for every network at one point or another, literally every network except Fox, and spent a lot of time helping Democratic candidates and causes and talking about that on both my show, our show, and then other shows, and giving speeches, which is a very lucrative post-government kind of endeavor. But it was a great mix of things. And then I had young kids. And that worked really well for me. And then I went to what was then the Glover Park Group, which is now called FGS, which is a firm that was started by many of my friends from the Clinton administration. And I was there for several years, and I worked on a lot of different kinds of clients. And I also had some media and entertainment clients because I was always interested in that. I'm from Los Angeles, and I was offered the job at Warner Brothers as the head of the worldwide corporate communications and public affairs. And so I had been living in D.C., and then we moved back to Los Angeles. And that was a great job. I loved it. It was a ton of fun. And then AT&T bought Time Warner, and it got a little bit less fun. But it was all fine. I left, and it was very amicable, and I set my exit date for April 1st, 2020, or whatever it was. And of course, I walked out into the pandemic. I was going to take a sabbatical, and I was going to go travel around the country and sort of figure out what I wanted to do next. And obviously that wasn't possible. So I got a call from the governor's office. Hey, can you come help us?
How did that come about? Did you know Ann O'Leary?
I knew Ann O'Leary,
chief of staff?
It's from Clinton world, because Clinton had been deeply involved in particularly Hillary Clinton's campaign and transition, planning for a transition that didn't happen. But I had seen her just a couple months before she brought her kids to Warner Brothers. And so set her up for a tour, and then we had lunch, and I told her I was leaving. So she called me a couple months later and said, hey, did you actually leave? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, can you come help? I ended up working a lot with a large task force that the governor had created, right, with like 100 business leaders. That's always a challenging, just logistically, to have 100 people doing anything. And also because we didn't know what we were dealing with.
Right.
And the pandemic, as we recall, waxed and waned, right? Things would seem like they were getting under control, and then there'd be a new variant, and it would spike.
Delta virus.
The Delta virus. And so Dr. Mark Galley, who was the head of HHS, and myself, we laughed that we spent a lot of time on the phone, like closing businesses down and then opening them up and closing them down and opening them up. And, we were all just doing the best that we could. And, fortunately, we got through it, but it was a very long couple of years. But anyway, that led to the governor offering me the job I currently have, which is the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development.
You were my first press secretary, by the way, because you were, as one of our other guests said, a 30-nothing-year-old young woman from California who shows up in Washington and becomes the face of the Clinton administration. Like, what? How does this work? How was that received?
It was a very interesting, really remarkable time because you had this president who was a generational change. If you put yourself back in that time, we had one Democratic president, Jimmy Carter, who was not the most successful.
Right.
So there was no bench. There was no playbook. Right. It wasn't like now where you have, on both sides, you have really experienced hands who've been through it. We didn't have that. I wasn't the only young face. There was George Stephanopoulos and Paul Begala and people like that who were all the same, actually born in the same year. So that's both good from the perspective of people are paying attention. They're like, oh, this isn't like what I think of politics.
Right.
Who are these people?
Right.
And then it was also bad. Like, who are these toddlers, who are telling us like what? And I was the first woman to serve as White House press secretary as well. So being young, being female, and being from California, I say that's the trifecta of how not to go to that job. So it was challenging. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, and it was fantastic. But it was also, it was hard. I feel like a lot of people now have had Jen Psaki, who's a friend and was a terrific press secretary. Yeah. She had been the communications director at the White House, and she'd been the spokesperson at the Pentagon. So she had had all this previous experience, which was great. So when she got to the White House, she was just in a totally different place in her trajectory than I was. And so you do the best you can, but, we did kind of make it up as we went along.
How did you go from campaign volunteer aide to transition, and then you're going to be press secretary? And at the time, again, press secretary wasn't necessarily the person who was out there every day, right?
Well, it really was, because it had been, the previous press secretary was Marlin Fitzwater, who had served both President George H.W. Bush, and before that he'd been press secretary to President Reagan. So he had a lot of experience. I had met President Clinton, then Governor Clinton, a couple of times, just through the circles of Democratic politics. He was super impressive. He was the candidate that I was most interested in. His politics kind of aligned with mine. And I had a mentor named Mickey Cantor, who many people here in Los Angeles around the country know. He was Secretary of Commerce and USTR under Clinton. But he was an old friend of the Clintons. And so he called me one day and said, hey, the Clintons are looking for a press secretary. Do you want to interview? And I did. And they offered me the job. I was working on another campaign. I was working on Frank Jordan's campaign for the mayor of San Francisco. Wow. And we had just gotten in a runoff. I said, I'm not going to leave till this campaign's over. And they're like, okay. So on December 13th, 1991, I got on a plane and flew to Orlando, Florida for the straw poll. And that was it. I was on the campaign. It started late. Yeah. Bill Clinton did not declare for president until October 3rd, 1991. Which is super late in the current. It was late then to
barely over a year before the election.
Exactly, just over a year. And it was partly because President Bush, H.W. Bush, was sort of considered unbeatable. I mean, I'd worked on a lot of campaigns, right? I had worked for Walter Mondale. I thought he was doing great. He lost 49 states. And then I worked for Tom Bradley, who was the mayor of Los Angeles. He ran for governor of California. Loved him. He was an incredible, mentor to me and influence on my life. He ran for governor in 1986 and lost. Then I went to work for Michael Dukakis. Okay, that didn't go too good. Then I worked for Dianne Feinstein in the campaign for governor, which is the only race she'd ever lost. Right. So, it's pretty easy to understand why Bill Clinton hired me. But when we got to election night, I had never really worked on a winning campaign. Yeah. It was election night, and we're kind of rolling around the bars of Little Rock, and I realized, we have to work tomorrow. That really had not happened to me before, So I had to go track people down and
sleep in and then get up and be miserable the next day because you just lost.
Totally.
No, you got to go.
And you go in at like 11 and you get the stuff out of whatever your desk was. Yes. But no, we had to go to work. And like in the next 2 days, I remember we got like 1,000 calls into our little press office because it was Japanese television. And it was not just people in the United States want to interview the president-elect or want information about what's happening. It's the entire world. Right. And so we did, and the transition was super challenging for a lot of reasons. You run a marathon, and then you get to the finish line, they go, no. How about 7 or 8 more miles? Right? Just same pace, just keep going. So you're exhausted, but you're also excited. But it's now you add on top of the exhaustion and you add personal uncertainty. Right. So everybody, my team, you have a lot of uncertainty on top of trying to, like, the most important thing is preparing Bill Clinton to be the leader of the free world, president of the United States. Over time, we sort of figured it out and we were offered jobs, and I assumed I would go to Washington in some capacity. I did not assume that I would be White House press secretary.
Right. Was it something that dawned on you guys that you would be the first woman to sit in that role?
It's such a good question, Anthony. Yeah. I don't even know when that occurred to me. I think the president was under pressure, the president-elect, because he had promised to create a cabinet that looked like America and a White House staff that looked like America. And had promised to make one of the big 4 cabinet positions a woman, which is defense, state, justice, and treasury, right? And he'd pointed 3 of the 4, and they're all men. Yeah. And then, you had this whole thing about the woman attorney general. So that was a whole thing. And then there was a pressure on the staff and visible people on the staff. And so there was definitely pressure on him to give that job to me.
Right. Oh, I see. Got it.
Because you wanted to have a visible.
Yes.
It was less that I was the first, although I'm sure that was somewhere in the conversation that I was that. Right. So there would be a visible woman speaking on behalf of the administration and the president. In transitions, there's just a lot of people have a lot of opinions about who would be the best person.
That's right.
And people have agendas.
Yes.
They're friends and people that they know they will have great access to. People they just respect and think, as president, you actually do have kind of an embarrassment of riches of people who would be qualified to serve, who want to serve. Yep. It's a hard time. Yeah. In my memory, that was the hardest time. Yeah. By the end of the campaign, George Stephanopoulos says, because he worries about everything, he would probably say he didn't think we were going to win. I definitely thought we were going to win. I mean, by the last couple months, not that something couldn't have gone terribly wrong, but it's like if we continue to perform at this level, he will win.
So you're there at the ground floor, you're building the administration. How long into your role would you say your first major crisis came?
Well, 24 hours?
Exactly.
No, because one of the first crises, what I just alluded to, was trying to fill the appointment for Attorney General. So the President-elect's first appointment was a very capable woman who turned out to have employed a nanny and a driver that were not in the country legally. Yes. And so she had to step aside. And then there was another appointment, and she had to step aside. And then there was Janet Reno. So that was all happening within the first couple of days. Yes. Yeah. So we went right, and then we had a few things, case in the military in the opening weeks, and we had some international challenges in the opening. So it took no time at all.
I don't know what it's like to work in the White House. I obviously worked in a governor's office, but not.
It's it's like bigger, definitely more complicated because there's you got 535 members of Congress, right, and you got 50 states out there with their own ideas about things. So it's very large, very complex. There's a lot of stakeholders and a lot of forces, but it's also like you're the most powerful person really in the world. In the world, absolutely. And just the bully pulpit allows you to raise issues and talk about things. And certainly Bill Clinton was always good at using the bully pulpit, but by the second term, other than a few scandals, he was very, very good at driving kind of an agenda from the podium. Although, the second term is hard, and most presidents look a little overseas because you can act with authority in ways that are harder for you at home.
What do you think was the worst day you had in the White House? I mean, we know history, you know, what happened with the biggest scandal at the Clinton administration. It would be obvious to assume in that period was probably the worst, but maybe not.
On a personal level, there was a deputy White House counsel named Vince Foster who took his life.
I do remember that.
The pressures, who knows? And I actually said, who knows? And that became a scandal because I was obviously hiding something by not telling what I knew, which was nothing other than he was a dear man and a good human, and it was tragic. Yeah. So that was terrible. Yeah. When George H.W. Bush, as former president, had gone back to Kuwait to celebrate the liberation of Kuwait in the Gulf War, and there was an attempt on his life, but that was foiled by the FBI. Yep. So obviously, President Clinton was like, "We're gonna investigate that, and we're gonna get to the bottom of it." I would get asked about that in my briefings periodically, and my guidance was always the same, which was, FBI's investigating it. When they reach a conclusion, President will have more to say about it. And one day I gave that guidance. Well, it turned out that the FBI had concluded that there was a terrorist plot that had been orchestrated by Iraq, and he was preparing to strike.
Oh.
And let's just say I got caught because I had said that, the president was still waiting for the results of this investigation and that we were a little bit in a pickle. And the White House press corps was going on a group trip to a Baltimore Orioles game on I guess it was a Friday night.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, and I don't know if this still happens, but we would put a lid on and say there's no more news for tonight. And it turned out that while they were at the game, the news of the strike was announced. And so I had misled them not once, but twice. Kind of a rookie mistake, really.
Yeah.
And it was a very tough couple of days for me personally. Yeah. It was a blow to my credibility, and I like to think I recovered from it, but it was a painful lesson.
I took a class in undergrad at UC Davis. I have to give a plug and a shout out to my undergrad on group dynamics. And there's a description of group dynamics that breaks it down into the different parts of like the group's formation. And so it's forming, storming, norming, and performing.
Oh, interesting.
Right? So these four distinct groups, right? I was in the first 2 years of the Newsom administration, the forming. When we came in on day one, no one had held the job that they were in, including the governor.
Right.
Then COVID hits.
It was like
so we had to live
early in the second year.
All of 2020 in that second year of the forming period. So you come in.
Yeah.
You had 3 of those periods.
Yeah, right? I guess so. I mean, but it's funny because there was the pandemic, which interrupted everything, right? And I think tested certainly the governor, but everybody else in ways that nobody expected. Yep. And then you had a recall.
Right.
The governor's recalled because, a couple people didn't like his, and he won that by a landslide. So that was, and then he had a re-election.
Yep.
I don't know. I feel like there was one period of kind of, I don't know, norm, which was after the re-elect, right? There was a period between the re-elect and the return of Donald Trump where it was sort of business as usual. Although with, with Governor Newsom, there's never business as usual. There's always kind of like, what's next? And then people come and go. Right? We're on the 4th chief of staff.
Right.
Jim DeBoo, who you've had on this show, was a fantastic chief of staff and a great human being. And there's just been a lot of changes to the political environment. So I don't know. If you went back and studied it, you'd probably have a couple cycles of this, right? Of forming and storming and then norming and performing and maybe even some ways that they overlap, right? Depending. But I think there's been more than one cycle of it.
And your job is actually closer to where he is in his mind about, California being a place for business and having been a small business owner that he was. Like, how challenging has it been for you to tell that story? You just came back from...
We were at the Munich Security Conference.
In Munich, and trying to tell the California story and make California a place both for partnership and for business. There is this constant drumbeat of California being a tough place to do business. Yeah. And it's your job as a narrative shaper that you are.
I think it's a couple of things. It's to try to make it as good a place as it can be to do business, right? Yeah. So we want to change not just the perception, or we want to improve the perception and the reality. But with California, I think it's look. There are some challenging things about the state. It is a large and complex place. We have led the world in things like environmental protection, and that has made it harder to build in some instances, right? And we're a decentralized state, and very big state, as you know, and there's a lot of jurisdictions. We have 58 counties, and I don't know how many cities. There's a number, by I should know.
Or so
it's a lot, hundreds of cities, and there's a lot of overlapping rules and regulations, and so that makes it's not just from the state perspective. So there's things that you can solve and things that you can't solve, right? But still, how do you make progress on those things? It is an incredibly dynamic place to do business. Right. We are the 4th largest economy in the world. If there's anybody in California who hasn't heard that come out of the governor's mouth 100 times, then they're probably not watching TV, because it's something that we're really proud of. This is a big dynamic economy, and there's a lot of reasons for that. This is intentional. It's not an accident. That's why we're the entertainment capital of the world, and why we're the technology capital of the world, and why we have the best higher education system in the world, and why we attract the best and the brightest, the first round draft picks, as the governor likes to say,
there you go.
From all over the world. They want to come here. Anyway, that's the California story. So we both try to make things better for reals, so that people can do business here. Right. And then we try to tell the story, because the California brand is really strong.
I actually heard you say people sometimes criticize California as being this kind of whacked out place. I should let you do the analogy, which I will. But you talked about, was it a leaning ship, or it's when something tilts and all the...
somebody said that to me once, again, being young and female and right from California. Okay. Somebody literally said to me, California, yeah, they tilted the country to the left and all the fruits and nuts rolled, down to California. And I was like, okay, yeah, maybe. Yeah. So, maybe, and you know what? And we said, come on in. We welcome you.
And we will take that.
I love how the governor sometimes describes San Francisco as 49 square miles surrounded by reality. It's part of the brand.
Right. I used to watch The West Wing, but in preparation for this, I tried to prepare a little bit. And in fact, I probably prepared more by watching The West Wing and watching CJ, because now that I know you, it's uncanny. Yeah. Did she spend a lot of time with you to prepare for her role?
We did spend some time together, which was a blast and a privilege. And I still see her from time to time, which is always great because she's such an incredibly talented actress. But when Aaron Sorkin had written the screenplay for the movie The American President, which Rob Reiner directed. Right. So Rob and Aaron came to Washington and spent literally a couple weeks hanging around and going to meetings and going to briefings and sort of to, kind of finish The American President. But then Aaron got the idea for the show from that. So the culture of it was definitely the Clinton White House, right? And so, and a lot of the characters are, based on what he saw there and kind of how things work. But then he obviously took his creative liberties as well. So it was just a really fun project to work on. And the cast was great. And still to this day, people come up to me and say, I got inspired to public service because I watched The West Wing. Or they'll say, I'm watching The West Wing again because it gives me such comfort in challenging times. And you'd be surprised at who some of those people are, like people you would never expect. The show holds up really well from the perspective of a well-made, a well-crafted, and an interesting show. But it also, I think, provides some interesting insights into politics and power and the White House.
100%. Well, let me ask you this. What would you say is most accurate in terms of reality and then most dramatized? Like, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
People always say, like, that would never happen. But then you go, oh, wait, actually, it does happen.
I know. But there's always...
that's the way it works. It's like, actually, that's not the way it works.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that was probably, to me at the time, felt the least realistic in some ways was there was like 7 or 8 people that make every decision. Okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and in the real world, as you know from being in government, there's way more stakeholders and pressure points and complexity than you can show in it or want to show in a television show. But the flip side of that was, I think that Aaron, one of the missions that he gave the writers, and I worked more with the writers than anybody else, was you have to have real arguments. Yeah. Right? You can't have you can't give the conservatives the stupid argument every case because it has to be a real fight. Like, this is about real stuff.
Yes.
And you got to give them the best possible argument. And then if you win, you're winning something that's important. And so I think that's one of the reasons that the show holds up is it didn't take cheap wins.
Yeah.
It made the characters work for their wins. Right. So that was part of it. And then I think just how many things are always happening, even though it was in a slimmed down environment. And one of the famous kind of ways the show communicated that was the walk and talk, right?
Yes.
When people first started watching the show, they're like, that doesn't happen. No one's walking to the West Lobby talking about national security issues. And I know. The point here is there's so much happening that we're walking and talking all the time. We're always in motion, which I think is a really great demonstration of a visual demonstration of something that we all experience.
Let's end with this, because I do got to ask you, you've had a perspective on what it's like to be in a presidency and what it takes to get elected president.
Yeah.
We've only had 2 presidents, who've come from California, both Republicans. So they sort of bucked that notion, right? Could a Democrat become president out of California?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's hard, but I think it's hard being from Arkansas.
Yeah.
By the way, a tiny flyover state with some of the highest poverty and lowest achievement rates in the country at the time. Yeah. I mean, why is that a panacea of electability?
Right. And a peanut farmer from Georgia.
Yeah. What is the profile of electability? Like, what state is the model?
Right.
I learned almost everything I know about politics from Bill Clinton and Gavin Newsom, but elections are about the future.
Yes.
They're not about the past. And you do have to be able to make a case, but if you translate California's success to the future, that's potentially a winning formula.
Right.
Bill Clinton famously was always, they want to talk about my past. I want to talk about your future. And that was a winner for him because elections are about the future, and it's tell me what you're going to do for me. I don't want to sit here and litigate every decision you made in your last job.
We know how much Gavin Newsom admires both Bill Clinton, and we know how much he admires Robert Kennedy. When he uses that line, they want to talk about my past, but I want to talk about your future. I'm going to give you the credit for it. And do you think he can win if he runs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, can win. It is, and I say that with deep respect. Gavin Newsom is incredibly skilled. I think he's been a terrific governor. I think he's really good at the art of politics. And I mean the art of politics. It's telling a story. It's taking a punch, being willing to make tough decisions, sometimes swinging for the fences. I think he has done all of that really well. And I think over the 7.5 years, whatever it is now that he's been governor, you would hope he has grown in the job. I think he commands the real estate like nobody's done it better.
Yeah.
And so I think, you take a really a 5-tool player, to use a baseball analogy, and you put him on the field. Now, there's going to be a lot of other talented people on the field, and it's a very tricky game, right? And circumstances change, and the thing moves fast. And by the way, it's not even clear that he is going to run.
Right.
And you and I say, we know that that's true, even though the rest of the world assumes he's made a decision.
Correct. That is correct.
That is a door that is open, but it has not stepped through it. And it's open partly because he's performed well and people are talking about him. There's many twists and turns to any presidential campaign. Like I said, it is a tough game. There's a lot of casualties in that process, but I think a Californian can win. I think Gavin Newsom has the skills and talent to do it. If he decides to run, he'll be a formidable candidate, and we'll see what happens.
Well, there you go. We'll leave it at that. And if anybody knows, it would be you, because you've seen it and you've done it, and we appreciate you coming in.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, Anthony. It's always great to be with you.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.